Welcome everyone and happy Friday. Today we are starting the weekend and we are starting with an informational video. I'm here to deliver to you a whole bunch of links, a whole bunch of sites and perhaps even some add-ons for you to take as we get close to the release of the season. So, likely for today I feel much better as I had to ditch yesterday's stream due to a sudden sneak attack of a cold which prevented me from living for a few hours. Luckily today I am fine, so for everyone who still wanted to, I will be doing the second part of my Mythic 0 World Tour tonight on stream. So if you're around at 10 PM European time zones, 1 PM Pacific and 4 PM Eastern in the US and somehow play on the EU servers, you can pop by on stream and we'll be doing some keys together. Try not to embarrass yourself too much. So for today, the things I have to give out. These are things that will help you keep track of your character, keep track of the meta, keep track of how things should be done and help you with dungeons and with Mythic Plus. As the season begins, it is likely you're still going to be quite lost and confused about many things like, for example, routes in Mythic Plus, dangerous casts, dangerous spells, learning mechanics from enemies in Mythic Plus, perhaps in dungeons you haven't done in years like Court of Stars or like Halls of Valor, or maybe you haven't even done them once because you weren't playing in Legion. And then also some guides, quick and short, on bosses, for example, raid bosses, how to find all of this very quickly and easily. So, you are perhaps already aware of a site like this one. This is Subcreation. This is, I guess, your general starting hub when you're looking especially to Mythic Plus. This is the simplest way for you to get an easy glance at the difficulty of the dungeons for the week, depending on the affixes, and then the different tier lists of the different roles, tanks, healers, ranged, and melee DPS. It is also the simplest way for you and the quickest way for you to say, oh, I am playing Blood DK, I wonder how Blood DKs play. And then you can just check what exactly they are doing, and they also have calculators and copying the entire set of talents, since now we are in Dragonflight with quite the complicated way to talent yourself as a spec. You can check this in many different ways and many different things to see how different specs are playing different dungeons, etc, etc. So this is quite the popular one. However, same goes for Raider.io. If you want to check the weekly route of Mythic Plus, or if you simply want to check leaderboards to see stats of Dragonflight, which will eventually fill up quite soon, but these are quite known. So let's go for something else. Another one that is perhaps good to keep an eye out on is KeystoneGuru. This is definitely more focused on Mythic Plus players. Many Mythic Plus players already know about this site, and you can start tinkering with some of these. For example, something like Dragonflight Season 1, you can start looking at something like Court of Stars. As I said, maybe you were never playing Legion, maybe you don't even know what Court of Stars is, and you can start looking at some of the already made guides, already made routes for the actual key to show you what is the general plan, what seems to be the general route of the key. This is perhaps more useful to tanks than it is to, for example, an AFK brainlet DPS who is simply following along and going with the flow, but still it can help you learn. And of course, as soon as the season starts, many of these routes will start getting, liked, upvoted. You will be able to start seeing the most used ones, the most liked one, and the most popular ones. So you will get a quite simple picture of what is the general key being used in different dungeons. And of course, you can also export these routes and import them into add-ons like, for example, dungeon tools to make you get your route in-game as well. This is quite good and quite helpful if you're planning to go a little bit deeper perhaps than previous seasons into Mythic Plus. This would be a good starting point for your key spam in just a few days. Going away from key spamming and instead jumping into raiding, you have TankNotes. TankNotes to be split at the same time with another thing called MythicTrap. So both of these things are very nice. If I had to give you a description, MythicTrap is the more clean, simple and aesthetic of the two sites. It's just more appealing to look at. It's quite nice to just see how it's being laid out in both the abilities and the explanations and the split of the different phases, telling you what's happening tied to the different abilities and a very simple what to do. It's been improved over time as we made this video a couple of years ago before Shadowlands. MythicTrap has gotten much better. Now you have not just different difficulties but also role filters. If, for example, you don't care about what a tank has to do in this fight, keeping track of what can kill you, for example, in here. So it's been made quite better over time, but it is still quite simple, right? It's quite minimalistic and quite simplistic over time. Instead, you can look at something a little bit more old school, a little bit more on the boomer side, more writing, more explanations, and still a good amount of videos and a good amount of showing what the mechanics actually do, but you know, it's not as cool looking, it's not as modern as MythicTrap, so perhaps some players will like it less, especially the ones that cannot read and like to look at pictures instead. This is still a very good place for you to start learning how mechanics work, in particular if you are a tank, right? This being called TankNotes will have quite a few explanation on what you should do as a tank, including things like, for example, the damage profile of the fight to show you how you should prepare yourself for the fight, as well as the tips and tricks based on the depending mechanics that you can deal with as a spec. Like, for example, a Prot Paladin can use spell warding to prevent you from gaining any burning wound stacks, and then a Prot Warrior can go fuck himself, right? That is what TankNotes can explain to you as a tank. TankNotes will eventually also work for Mythic Plus dungeons as well. For now, they have only laid out the bosses for the next raid. Same goes for MythicTrap. MythicTrap, in here you get the all raid explanation of all the bosses. Eventually you will get one for dungeons as well. There is also another site, perhaps a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more complicated, so you're like, no, too many numbers, too many letters, I don't want to look at it, I will show it to you anyways. We're talking about WarcraftLogs. So you might already know the popular things about WarcraftLogs, like, for example, the statistics to check, you know, the meta, you know, who is doing what, the amount of damage on average, the amount of popularity on average. But there are also some interesting things you can check, like, for example, logs. You can basically spy on people. For example, this guy, Glyco. What about Outlaw? I don't know how to play Outlaw. How do I play Outlaw? Well, you can check things like, for example, what does he play? What type of rotations does he use, by checking things like, for example, timelines. Timelines and casts will give you a very simple show pretty much of all of the abilities he's using depending on the fight. You can check the fight right here. What about what happens during Skylord Tovra? And you get to see his opener, for example. That can help you a lot understand, for example, openers of DPS specs, or maybe healers. Maybe you can check very high damage patterns of certain bosses or certain trash mobs and see what a healer is doing to deal with that damage. You can even check, even more simply, if you can't understand any of this, like, for example, replay is basically a 2D representation of what is exactly going on in the entire key. Very, very simply. This can help, for example, understand things like skips, understand things like routes. That can also help you a lot without having to go and start checking things like YouTube videos or streams of players. You might be able to see it here as well from this type of knowledge from WarcraftLogs. Now, besides this, we can finish with a more written guide for people who don't like to look at videos and like to read things in peace, quietly. There is something like this, which I will leave behind, a cheat sheet for Dragonflight Season 1. You have a few other resources like a plater profile, a focus target interrupt, and a Mythic Plus auto marker, and then at the bottom each and every one of the dungeons with a few explanations on what both the trash is doing as well as what the bosses are doing. Also a few spell IDs for the more technical of you who want to start marking the dangerous spells of each and every dungeon to make them more visible to you. That is also going to help you quite a lot. Be quite quick in identifying the spell ID of each of the threatening spells in each of the dungeons available for the first season of the expansion. We close the entire list with the help of the aforementioned plater profile, which is a different one. This, I think, is more complete than the original one. Don't get weirded out if it is in Chinese. It's still gonna work just fine. If your game is in English, this is gonna be in English. So this is going to be quite comprehensive, a quite comprehensive set of help for your target plates in Mythic Plus. It has a lot, and I mean a lot, of scripts. These are all the scripts available in the actual plater, from things like explosion affix for Mythic Plus to important units, to things like cast frontal cone warning, or things like health markers, or things like special buff options, or things like inspiring health glow. Never mind, inspiring is dead this season. Spellcast filter, aura form, attacking a specific unit warning, or other things that you can just get made by other people without having to know how to make them yourself. This is quite the nice weak aura for Mythic Plus. You can of course still find many others on wago.io, which is perhaps the other thing which could be worth mentioning. When you want to look at addons, there are plenty of repositories in here of some of the more popular addons like DBM, Voodoo, Plater, Opie, LVY. You can just copy them and import them in your game directly without having to do anything by yourself. You're a priest, you want to try a healer frame that you haven't used before, you go to Wago, you go to Voodoo, you go to Priest, Discipline, and you can start finding plenty of different profiles already made by other people for you to check. So that is also a very helpful thing for you to get ready, to make sure it's clean and nice and tidy before the release of the season in just a few days. Pretty much everything that was mentioned in here will be found in the description down below. So I hope you find at least some of these links to some of these sites or add-ons helpful before the release of the season. For now, however, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your weekend. We have nothing else more to say for today. As always, thanks of course to all of my Patreon supporters for contributing and for helping to the growth of myself and this channel. You can still support in other ways, not including the expenditure of money, liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself are plenty good enough ways to support. Also, for more social interactions, you can follow me on Twitter, you can subscribe to my Patreon to get access to my Discord server, and as a reminder, once again, I am also nowadays streaming on Twitch, starting at 10 p.m. more or less European time zones, 1 p.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. Eastern US time zones. As a last reminder, tonight we are going to complete our final part of the Mythic 0 World Tour on my Druid. So if you're in Europe and you are on and about around tonight evening time, you can pop by and try to join in our Mythic 0 runs. This being said, I'm going to leave you now. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, incredible. I woke up almost, it's getting close. I woke up at 2 p.m. That is very close to morning time. You know, it could have been a record, but we were still 2 hours off. But we're getting close.